Outside, the blizzard roared with icy fury, but inside Oakidge Elementary, the coldest chill wasn't from the snow. It was the cruel laughter of a teacher in a warm classroom, while just 3 feet away, a 6-year-old boy shivered to death, clutching a soggy paper star he painstakingly made for her. She warned him if he tried to move, his father would end up behind bars. She believed fear would silence him forever. But she was dead wrong, because out in the storm, a police cruiser sped through the raging wind carrying a father and his loyal German shepherd ready to unleash a justice so fierce it would shake the whole town to its core. When that door finally swung open, what unfolded will break your heart, then mend it stronger and more unyielding than ever before. But first, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country down in the comments. And if you believe God sends angels sometimes with badges and fur to protect the innocent, hit that subscribe button. This story shows that even in the coldest winter, love burns with the fiercest light. Over Oakidge, the sky didn't darken slowly like a normal winter afternoon. Instead, it was swallowed whole by a bruised, stormy gray ceiling tumbling down with a terrifying rush. The meteorologist called it a flash freeze, a term that sounded like a disaster movie, until the temperature truly began its deadly plunge. Within just 20 minutes, the wet slush that coated the streets of this quiet American town solidified into jagged ice ridges, and the air sharpened so violently it felt like you were breathing shards of glass. The cheerful Christmas lights strung along Main Street flickered one last time, then died out, unable to withstand the howling gale racing through the brick-lined blocks, twisting the festive scene into something ghostly and abandoned. Inside his patrol cruiser, Dean sat the engine rumbling unevenly in the bitter cold. He was 32, though the dark shadows beneath his eyes and the tight set of his jaw aged him beyond his years. Once athletic, now drained and worn down, broad shoulders slightly hunched, his black hair closely cropped, and a face marked by the constant stubble of a single dad with little time to care for himself. Dispatch, this is Unit 4, Alpha. Dean spoke into the radio, his voice taut with tension. Conditions are worsening fast on the north side. Visibility has dropped near zero. The static crackled back, followed by a distorted signal, swallowed by the storm's interference. In the back seat, separated by wire mesh, was Duke. Duke was a 5-year-old German shepherd, a massive dog with a black and tan coat that looked like velvet pressed over steel, usually composed with ears alert and amber eyes scanning his world with calm professionalism. Today, Duke was restless. He paced the small, cage-like space behind the seat, his claws tapping out a tense rhythm on the hard plastic floor, letting out a low, vibrating whine Dean felt deep in his chest. Dean pressed a gloved hand to his face, the leather creaking quietly in the still cabin. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was only 2 in the afternoon, but outside felt like the dead of night, with windshield wipers slapping violently against the glass, struggling futilely against sideways snow that cut through the storm like blades. Silence spread, then the harsh beep of a busy signal followed by nothing but emptiness. The cell towers were either frozen stiff or utterly overwhelmed. "Come on," Dean murmured, his thumb hovering nervously over the redial button. "Please pick up." He needed to hear Jace's voice, needed it like air. He had to know if the school's heating was holding steady through this merciless storm. Jace was his son, a tender 6-year-old with unruly brown hair and eyes too large for his delicate face. Small for his age, fragile in a way that cut deep into Dean's heart, a quiet soul seemingly unarmed for the cruelty of the world. Since his mother's passing 2 years ago, Jace had become the center of Dean's universe, the fragile pivot around which his entire life turned. The knot tightening in Dean's gut wasn't just because of the storm, it rooted itself in this morning's memory, one that had replayed over and over in his mind these past 6 hours, striking him like a blow to the chest. That morning their apartment was cold, a drafty 2-bedroom barely affordable on a cop's paycheck. The lingering scent of burnt toast filled the air, Dean's cooking skills still a work in progress. "Jace, hurry up, buddy. We're gonna be late." Dean had called, glancing at his watch. Jace appeared from his room, but wasn't wearing the festive red sweater Dean had laid out for the class Christmas party. Instead, he wore an oversized, faded gray hoodie that once belonged to a cousin drowning his small frame. The hood was pulled over his head. "Jace." Dean crouched down, trying to catch his son's gaze. "It's party day. Don't you want to look nice? Mrs. Vane had said everyone's dressing up." Jace looked down, hands clutching the sleeves of the hoodie, pulling them down until his fingers vanished. "No," he whispered. "I like this one." "It's got holes in the cuffs, Jace. Come on, let me help you change." Dean reached out, gently attempting to lift the sleeve of the hoodie. Jace's reaction was immediate and brutal. He flinched, jerking his arm back as if Dean's touch was fire. Stepping away suddenly, his eyes wide with raw panic. "I can do it!" Jace yelled, voice cracking. "Don't touch me, I'm cold!" Dean froze, his hand suspended mid-air. The sting of rejection hit him first, then a wave of heart-crushing guilt rolled over him. He glanced at that faded hoodie and the worn-out sneakers Jace wore. He's ashamed Dean thought his chest breaking open. Ashamed because I couldn't buy him that elf costume all the other kids have. Ashamed his clothes are hand-me-downs. He doesn't want me to see him because he thinks he's letting me down. "Okay," Dean whispered, lowering his hand. "Okay, Jace, you can wear the hoodie." "I'm sorry, buddy. I'll pick up some extra shifts next week. We'll get you some new clothes for the new year. I promise." Jace didn't meet his eyes, just nodded, clutching himself tight, standing there so tiny, so heartbreakingly alone in the hallway. Dean dropped him off at the school gate, watching him disappear into the crowd of brightly dressed, joyful kids, a shadow among the light. Back in the patrol car, the memory clenched around Dean's chest, forcing him to grip the steering wheel until his knuckles turned pale. He felt like he'd failed. Here he was protecting the city, but he couldn't shield his son from the bitter chill of poverty. He hadn't recognized the flinch for what it truly was, a shield against pain. He hadn't seen the long sleeves for the camouflage they served as, a silent guard. Instead, he only saw his own shortcomings mirrored in his son's guarded actions. A roar. The sound sliced through Dean's heavy thoughts. It wasn't an ordinary bark. It was a piercing, forlorn howl that twisted into a fierce snarl. Dean spun around. Duke was down silent, but Duke never truly settled. The dog now stood on the back seat, his body-taut nose pressed against the metal grid. He wasn't looking at Dean. His gaze was fixed firmly through the rear window locked on the north, where the elementary school stood. Duke scratched frantically at the mesh. Metal screeched against metal. His fur stood on end along his spine, a wild ridge of tension. Sharp, urgent barks spilled out, echoing deafeningly in the cramped interior. "Duke, cut it out," Dean ordered, voice shaky beneath his confidence. 3 years they'd been partners. He knew Duke better than most people in his life. Duke didn't flinch at rain, didn't howl at storms. This was different. This was the fierce warning Duke gave when he caught the scent of fear, or worse, blood. The radio crackled again, a rising static like a scream piercing the night. Then silence. The green light on the radio blinked off, swallowed by darkness. The power grid was crumbling. Dean glanced at his phone. No bars. Outside, a whiteout swallowed the world. The wind hammered the cruiser, rocking it hard on its suspension. The landscape was vanishing into a smoky ice cyclone. He looked back at Duke, who was now frantic, battering the door with his weight desperate to break free. Eyes blazing wide, locked on some invisible threat far beyond the storm. "You feel it too, don't you?" Dean murmured. A bone-chilling cold crept into Dean's very core, separate from the freezing air, a raw, ancient dread. Training told him to stay put, to wait for the plows to cut through, to never risk the cruiser in this zero-visibility freeze. Protocol demanded sheltering, waiting for the radio to pulse back to life. But Dean was no longer just a cop. He was a father who remembered the raw terror in his son's eyes that morning. A father who understood that the flinch wasn't about a faded hoodie. It was deeper, darker. This wasn't just knowledge. It was a visceral punch to the chest, like an icy hook pulling tight around his heart. "Hang on." Duke Dean growled. He slammed his hand down, flipping the switch. Red and blue lights ignited, slicing through the swirling blizzard like urgent beacons. The siren wailed sharply, piercing the empty street, a call where no ears were left to hear. Dean mashed the gas pedal. The cruiser's tires spun, hunting for grip on the slick black ice beneath. The car fishtailed hard rear end, swinging madly, but Dean steered into the slide with the unshakable calm of experience. His eyes narrowed, his face a grim canvas of resolve. He ignored every posted speed limit. He ignored the dead red lights, now just dark witnesses. He charged into the heart of the storm engine, roaring fierce, wipers slicing through the storm's fury, and behind him Duke's bark hammered out a relentless warning beat. He was coming for his son, and woe to anyone brave enough or foolish enough to stand in his way. The cruiser collided hard with a snowdrift on the edge of the school parking lot. The heavy vehicle shuddered as it died, and the world outside transformed into something unrecognizable, far from the familiar streets of Oakidge. It became a vast white void, an endless ocean of ice and howling wind that swallowed landmarks whole and drowned out every sound. Dean silenced the siren, and the sudden absence of its wailing left only the storm's fury, a deafening roar like a freight train hurtling dangerously close. He rammed his shoulder against the driver's side door, which groaned in protest, frozen solid by the sudden flash freeze, then cracked open with a sharp crack like a gunshot. The icy wind rushed in, stealing every last scrap of warmth. "Come on," Duke Dean shouted above the storm's howling. Duke didn't hesitate for a second. The large German shepherd sprang from the back seat, his paws sinking deep into the fresh, powdery snow. The snow was already up to Dean's calves, piling like sand dunes against the brick walls of Oakidge Elementary. Dean stumbled forward, the cold slamming into him, not just as a temperature, but as a brutal physical attack. It burned his exposed skin and stung his eyes, forcing tears that instantly froze on his lashes. He gripped his heavy flashlight, its beam slicing through the whiteout in a frantic, swirling cone. The front doors loomed like a fortress. The thick double doors were locked tight, a red light blinking ominously on the keypad. Dean pounded on the reinforced glass, the thudding sound muffled by the relentless wind. Peering inside, he saw a dark, main hallway, lit only by the faint, eerie green glow of emergency exit signs. "No power in the administration block," he murmured, heart pounding fiercely. They must have taken shelter in the classrooms on the generator's circuit. Dean knew the school's layout well. The kindergarten and first grade rooms were in the east wing facing the playground. If Jace was anywhere, that's where he'd be. "Find him, Duke." Find Jace. Dean's voice cracked with desperation. Duke lowered his head, his black nose twitching as he sifted through the freezing air. The scent was faint, buried beneath the sharp ozone of the storm and the biting cold. But the dog caught it. He barked once, sharp and commanding, and darted around the corner of the building. Dean followed, trudging through the thickening drifts. Each step was a relentless struggle. His police boots, heavy and unyielding, felt like lead. The wind assaulted him, trying to push him off his feet, but he leaned into it, driven by a mounting terror coursing through his veins. As they rounded the corner, the storm's fury softened slightly. This side of the school was shielded somewhat from the full brunt of the north wind, creating a swirling bubble of calmer air. There, like a radiant beacon in the bleak nightmare, a window gleamed. Dean froze, breath snagging in his throat. It was the window of Room 1B, Jace's classroom. Nearby, the school's backup generator thrummed steadily, its low mechanical hum powering the essential heat and light. Dean edged closer, drawn to the glow like a moth. He stood just feet from the glass, the scene inside strikingly peaceful, so aggressively normal that a wave of nausea swept over him. It felt like a glimpse into another world. Inside, the storm's rage didn't exist. The classroom glowed with a warm, honeyed light. Twinkling fairy lights framed the whiteboard, and at the center, A small electric fireplace flickered with a comforting artificial flame. And there stood Mrs. Vane. Angela Vane was a woman in her 50s who carried herself like a commander, donning armor forged from authority. She was tall and slender, her hair dyed in a harsh, unnatural shade of raven black, styled into a helmet of curls that seemed frozen in place, never wavering. She wore a spirited Christmas sweater, sparkling with sequins topped off with a plush Santa hat resting atop her head. To the outside world, she embodied the image of a devoted teacher. She wore a smile, but it was a rehearsed, tight smile that never reached her eyes, small, bead-like framed behind rimless glasses. She moved quietly among the desks, carrying a large wicker basket brimming with shiny, foil-wrapped gifts. Dean watched, frozen by the surreal scene. As Mrs. Vane handed a present to a little girl with blonde pigtails, the child's hands clapped, her face brightened with pure joy. The other kids laughed softly, their mouths moving in silent harmony with a song Dean couldn't hear beyond the storm's glass. They sipped hot cocoa from styrofoam cups, safe, warm, and happy. Dean frantically scanned the room, counting heads. 19, 20, 21. There should have been 22. He searched for the untidy brown hair. He looked for the oversized gray hoodie. He studied every shy smile hiding behind books. But Jace was not there. Dean stepped closer to the window, his fist raised, ready to pound the glass, to shout at the woman to open the door, to demand to know where his son was. But Duke didn't stop at the window. The dog let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the soles of Dean's boots. Duke ignored the warm glow. He ignored the laughing children. Instead, he darted past the window entirely and scrambled toward a shadowed corner where the classroom's brick wall met the jutting gymnasium. It was a blind spot, unseen from Mrs. Vane's desk from the middle of the room, even from the window where Dean stood. This corner was an architectural quirk, a place where shadows gathered. It was also where the wind came to die. The howling gale slammed against the gym wall and curled inward, swirling into a vortex of ice and snow that piled higher and deeper than anywhere else in the courtyard. Duke plunged headfirst into that swirl. His front paws clawed madly through the snow as his whines escalated into frantic, desperate yelps. Dean swung the beam of his flashlight away from the window's warmth and into the darkness of the corner. The beam caught on something not snow, a smear of faded gray fabric. "No," Dean whispered the word, breaking free from his lips, shattered by the cold night. "No, no, no." He lunged forward, collapsing to his knees in the snow beside Duke. There, wedged into the corner where brick met concrete foundation, lay a small, curled form. It was Jace. The boy lay motionless, curled into a fetal ball so tight he seemed impossibly small, knees tucked to his chin, his head bowed low. He wore no coat, no scarf. He was clad only in the thin, long-sleeved shirt he had worn beneath his hoodie that morning. The gray hoodie, the one he'd refused to shed, was missing. Snow had drifted over his legs and back, dusting his hair like powdered sugar. He looked like a forgotten sculpture, a piece of storm debris left behind. Dean reached out his hands, trembling so fiercely he almost dropped the flashlight. He touched Jace's shoulder. It was hard, not stiff from muscle tension, but solid, like frozen flesh. "Jace?" Dean's voice cracked, barely more than a broken whisper. No response, no flicker, no sign of life. Dean pulled his son away from the wall and turned him over. The beam from the flashlight illuminated Jace's face, and a scream welled up in Dean's chest, too raw and fierce to let loose. Jay's lips were dark, bruised shades of violet. His skin was pale and lifeless like cold marble, waxy and still. Ice crystals clung to his lashes, sealing his eyes shut. But the most chilling thing was the utter stillness. Jace wasn't trembling. Dean knew the signs of hypothermia cold-heartedly. The desperate fight to generate heat meant violent shivering. But when the shaking ceases, it's the body's grim surrender. His core temperature had dropped so dangerously low that his muscles had no strength left to contract. The shutdown had begun. "Jace, Jace, please look at me." Dean yanked off his glove and pressed his warm palm firmly to Jace's cheek. It felt like touching the hood of a car after a freezing winter night. Duke was there, pressing his big warm body against the boy's side, licking Jace's frozen hands with frantic urgency. Then, Dean caught sight of what Jace clung to tightly in his stiff, unmoving hands pressed close as if a barrier against the cold. A crumpled, soggy piece of paper soaked by snow, but unmistakable. It was a star, cut out from old newspaper with safety scissors colored unevenly in golden yellow crayon, jagged, imperfect, yet achingly beautiful. The kind of star a 6-year-old carefully crafts, tongue poking out in pure focus. The kind a child makes when he can't buy a gift but wants to give something precious to his teacher. Jace held that star like it was his last anchor to the world. He sat just 3 feet from a window, 3 feet from a roaring fire, 3 feet from warm cocoa and laughter. And yet he was freezing to death, clutching that gift, staring longingly at a party he wasn't allowed to join. Dean glanced up through the swirling snow. He saw Mrs. Vane through the glass, her head thrown back in laughter at a student's joke. She sipped her cocoa, soaking in the cozy warmth. The stark contrast ignited something inside Dean. The fear that had been clawing at him evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, white-hot fury fiercer than the blizzard itself. He was more than a cop now, more than a father. He had become a witness to a cruelty so callous it defied all humanity. He gathered his son into his arms, the small body stiff, almost weightless, and rose to his feet. The wind screamed around them, but Dean felt nothing, only the weight of his frozen son, and the burning resolve to tear down the wall standing between cold and warmth. The howling wind at the courtyard echoed like 1,000 voices screaming out, but inside Dean's mind, there was only a deafening silence, cold and dead settling over him the moment his fingers touched Jace's skin. He moved with the frantic, jagged desperation of a man running from death. Dean clawed at the zipper of his heavy patrol jacket, his fingers numb and clumsy like frozen blocks of ice, yet adrenaline drove them to work. He ripped off the coat, the Velcro tearing with a sharpness drowned out by the roaring storm. For a fleeting moment, the blizzard struck Dean's bare chest like a relentless sledgehammer. The cold hit him instantly and brutally, stealing the heat from his core. But Dean didn't feel it. He didn't care. He wrapped the heavy Kevlar-lined jacket tightly around Jace, enveloping his son completely. He pulled the hood up over the boy's pale blue lips and the frost that clung to his eyelashes, nestling that fragile, frozen little body close to the warmth of his own scent and heart. "I've got you," Dean murmured into the hood, his voice trembling with raw emotion. "Daddy's here. Don't let go, Jace. Stay awake for me, please. Don't you dare slip away." Jace was limp in his arms, his head resting heavily against Dean's chest, his eyes sealed tight by the unforgiving cold. The crumpled paper star still clenched in his tiny fist pressed between their bodies now. Dean lifted Jace smoothly, as if he weighed nothing at all. The boy seemed as light as a feather, delicate as finely spun glass. Duke waited at his side, pressed close against the glass door of the classroom. The German shepherd had fallen silent. The whimpering stopped. He stood utterly motionless. The fur along his spine was raised high, making him appear twice his usual size. His lips curled back in a silent snarl, revealing teeth as white as bone gleaming in the chaotic swirl of flashlight beams. Duke's gaze locked fiercely onto Mrs. Vane. Dean's attention drifted to the door. Shifting Jace's weight to his left arm, Dean freed his right. He curled his hand into a fist, ready to shatter the glass that kept his son trapped from the warmth beyond. Grasping the door handle, he braced himself to strike. The handle moved. Dean froze the world, suddenly tilting off its axis. He tried again. A soft click, smooth and clear. The lock disengaged without a sound. No resistance holding back the barrier. The door wasn't locked, after all. Dean stared at the cold metal handle, his mind reeling as a dark realization crashed over him. For all this time, the door had been unlocked. Jace wasn't trapped behind heavy locks or bolts. He'd been held prisoner by fear itself, sitting just 3 feet from safety, freezing in the cold night. But he never turned the handle. Why? Because she told him not to. That thought pierced Dean's mind like a venom-tipped arrow. She warned him away, and he was so terrified of breaking that rule, so utterly scared of being bad that he let himself freeze rather than reach for the door that was already open. This wasn't mere neglect. It was a twisted form of psychological captivity. It was cruelty beyond belief. The fire of rage burning in Dean's gut suddenly turned ice cold. It shifted into a cold, precise wrath. A fury that didn't yell, but instead calculated. A fury strong enough to bring entire worlds crashing down. Duke Dean whispered, barely audible, "Heel." The German shepherd instantly settled at Dean's side, his body taut and radiating raw strength. Dean didn't smash the door open. He didn't charge in like some blazing hero. He simply turned the handle and pushed the door open, slow and deliberate. The moment the door cracked, the storm unleashed its fury, all the snow and ice barreling in at once through the gap. A wild gust shrieked into the cozy classroom, sending papers flying off the desks. The fairy lights twisted and swung violently in the sudden blast. Inside the Christmas tune, an upbeat version of Jingle Bell Rock was drowned out by howling wind. The cozy atmosphere shattered instantly. Every one of the 21 students turned toward the side door. Their laughter died abruptly in their throats. Dean stepped across the threshold, an imposing figure carved from the storm itself. Snow blanketed him from head to toe, making him look like a mythic ice giant. He wore no coat, only his drenched uniform shirt clinging to him, badge shining faintly through. In his arms, he cradled a bundle wrapped in a police parka that resembled a body bag. At his side, a black and tan wolf moved silently, stalking into the room alongside him. The sharp click of claws echoed ominously against the linoleum floor. Mrs. Vane had been mid-laugh, her head thrown back, a hand resting gently on the shoulder of a boy in the front row. She suddenly froze. Her mouth hung open, but the laughter vanished. Her gaze darted to the open door, then to Dean, and finally to the fragile bundle cradled in his arms. Dean slammed the door shut with his heel. Thud. The thunderous storm outside was abruptly silenced, replaced by a heavy stillness that seemed to suck the air from the room. The only sound that remained was the faint hum of the electric heater and the uneven breaths of the German shepherd. Dean didn't utter a single word. No words were necessary. He moved past the rows of desks with the silent grace of a hunter, his heavy boots surprisingly muffled against the holiday-patterned rug. The children instinctively recoiled, their eyes wide with fear. Though they couldn't understand the full scope of events, every child's intuition screamed that something dark and dangerous had entered their space. Yet the real monster wasn't the man who stood here. The true monster was the fate that brought him to this place. Dean headed straight to the electric fireplace nestled in the center of the reading nook. He knelt down, carefully laying Jace down on the rug, just inches from the warmth. "It's okay," Dean whispered tenderly to the limp form, his voice soft, a stark contrast to the harsh weight on his face. "Feel that's warmth. Breathe it in, Jace." He gently pulled back the boy's hood. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Several children rose to their feet to get a better look. Among them was a small girl with glasses and pigtails, Lily, the diligent class monitor. At 7 years old, she was sharp and deeply observant. She stared at the pale blue face of the boy lying there, then glanced towards the empty desk at the back of the room, and her hands flew up to cover her mouth. "Is that Jace?" she whispered, her voice fragile and trembling in the heavy silence. "Is he gone?" The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Mrs. Vane snapped out of her stunned silence. Her cheeks flushed a deep crimson. She adjusted her glasses nervously, her hands trembling, and struggled to summon the stern authority she once wielded like a shield. Officer Creston," she stammered, taking a cautious step forward, then halted when Duke turned his amber eyes slowly to her. The dog remained silent, but his gaze was unblinking and intense, his body coiled like a spring ready to strike. "You can't just barge in here?" Mrs. Vane's voice rose sharply, trying and failing to mask her panic. "This is a private gathering. You're disturbing the students. And why do you have Jace? He was supposed to be in timeout. He was meant to be reflecting on his behavior." Dean stood upright. Turning slowly, he faced her. Towering at 6 feet 2 inches without his coat, the muscles in his arms and chest flexed, uncovered beneath his shirt. Taut and trembling not from cold but from the effort of restraining himself from grabbing her, his gaze locked on hers, unblinking. His eyes were dark, cold, utterly void of mercy or warmth. It was the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had witnessed too much pain mixed with the fierce, raw protectiveness of a father who came perilously close to losing everything. Mrs. Vane stumbled backward, crashing into her desk. A wicker basket filled with gifts tipped over, scattering glossy boxes across the floor. Dean's voice, low and steady like tires grinding over gravel, broke the silence. Quiet yet impossible to ignore. "You sent him outside," Dean said. He stepped in her direction with a sudden, frozen intensity. "It wasn't even that cold when I sent him out," Mrs. Vane squeaked, her voice cracking, as she glanced desperately at the children silently begging for support. But all eyes were locked on Dean, filled with a mix of awe and fear. He was causing a ruckus. He dragged garbage into my classroom, refused to listen to any instructions. "The door," Dean said, stepping forward again. Mrs. Vane's back slammed into the whiteboard. "What? The door wasn't locked." "Well, yes, obviously not." Mrs. Vane's tone sharpened, defensive. "I'm no villain. I never locked him out. He could have come in any time. If he was cold, he could have just come in. It's his stubbornness. Just like his mother, always craving attention, always growling." Duke took a slow, deliberate step forward. From deep within his chest came a growl, low, resonant, bone-chilling. It wasn't just a warning, it was a vow. Mrs. Vane's veins thrummed visibly as she scrambled sideways, clutching her sparkling sweater. Dean didn't call the dog off this time. He simply stared down at her. "He didn't come inside," Dean said, his voice dropping to a darker tone, "because he was more afraid of you than of death." The words hit like a gavel striking stone. "He sat there," Dean continued, trembling, finger pointing at the window, "watching you sip your cocoa, watching you laugh," and he froze. He stopped shaking Mrs. Vane. "Do you understand what that means?" Dean leaned in, closing the space between them, towering over her, smelling of snow ozone and raw anger. "It means his body gave out. It means I found my 6-year-old son clutching a paper star waiting to die just 3 feet from your desk." Mrs. Vane's mouth opened, but no words escaped. Her eyes flicked to Jace, still and silent by the heater, then back to Dean. The weight of what she'd done, or maybe the harsh reality of the consequences she now faced, finally pierced her self-obsession. I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't look," Dean corrected flatly. He turned away, refusing to give her his gaze. Kneeling beside Jace again, Dean peeled off his soaked uniform shirt, left in only his white undershirt, rubbing Jace's arms to spark warmth, desperate to revive the blood beneath the skin. "Duke," Dean said in a low tone. "Guard." Duke shifted not toward Jace, but settling firmly between Dean and Mrs. Vane. He sat a vigilant, sentinel, black and tan fortress, declaring, "Don't move, don't speak, don't even breathe." Silence returned. But this time, it was no longer the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of judgment. And within that stillness, a faint sound emerged. A cough, weak, wet, ragged. Dean froze, looking down just as Jace's eyelids fluttered. A gentle breath escaped his pale blue lips. "Dad." The word whispered like a ghost, barely a breath in the room. Dean exhaled a sound caught somewhere between a breath and a sob. Pulling Jace close, pressing his forehead against the boy's icy temple, Dean choked out, "I'm here, buddy. I'm right here." The electric fireplace radiated dry, concentrated warmth, but for Dean, it was never enough. Kneeling on the alphabet rug, his large frame curled protectively over Jace, he rubbed his son's limbs with frantic urgency. "That's it, buddy. Dean murmured, voice thick with grief and hope. "Hold on, just breathe." Jace was awake, but his mind was somewhere else. His eyes, normally bright and curious, were glassy and unfocused, flickering around the room as if chasing unseen shadows. The thawing was agonizing. Dean understood this well from his training. As blood began to rush back into the frozen limbs, it felt as if flames were licking the skin, like thousands of tiny needles stabbing every inch. Jace whimpered a sharp, brittle sound, piercing the stillness of the classroom. He tried to pull his hands away from Dean's grasp. "It hurts," Jace whispered faintly, his teeth chattering so violently his words were broken into jagged pieces. "Daddy, it's burning." "I know, Jace, I know," Dean comforted even as his own heart ached fiercely. "That pain means you're warming up. The agony is proof you're alive." Duke, still sitting like a steadfast sentry between the fireplace and Mrs. Vane, let out a soft whine, ears flicking towards the boy. But his unwavering gaze never left the teacher. Mrs. Vane remained pressed to the whiteboard, clutching her sequined sweater like a shield against the storm. She looked wan, her eyes flicking nervously between the door and the phone on her desk, calculating if she could reach it before Duke intervened. Dean paid her no mind. What he needed was an answer. The question burning through his chest ever since he turned that unlocked doorknob. He leaned closer to Jace, gently brushing the damp, tangled hair off his son's forehead. "Jace," Dean said softly, staring deep into his boy's eyes. "I need you to listen to me right now. This is important." Jace blinked, focusing on his father's face. "The door," Dean said, keeping his voice steady. "That door wasn't locked, Jace. I opened it wide open. So why didn't you come inside? Why did you stay out in the snow?" Jace's eyes widened, panic flashing sharp and fast. He tried to push himself up, but his weak muscles wouldn't obey, and he sagged back against Dean's chest. "I couldn't," Jace gasped. "I couldn't cross the line." Dean frowned. "What line?" "The threshold," Jace whispered, repeating a word too heavy, too formal for his 6-year-old voice. It was a word that had been drilled into him. Mrs. Bain had said, The doorframe is the line the law." An icy dread gripped Dean's gut. What did she say would happen if you crossed that line? Jace looked past Dean, his eyes locking onto Mrs. Vane. Suddenly he shrank back, burying his face deep in Dean's shoulder. She said, Jace's words barely a whisper, "If I stepped back inside before I was purified, if I broke the rules, the police would have to come." Dean's breath caught. "The police?" Jace nodded against Dean's chest. She said bad boys who break rules make their daddies look bad. She said, "If I cross that door, the police will come and take you away because I'm responsible for you. And if I'm bad, you'll go to prison." The air whooshed from Dean's lungs. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a calculated, devastating strike. Mrs. Bain had stolen what Jace loved most, his father, and twisted the only truth Jace knew about his father's work, that police catch bad guys into a cruel cage. She had weaponized Jace's love, turning it into a frozen prison that kept him locked in the snowbank. Tears streamed down Jace's face, blending with the melting frost on his cheeks. "I didn't want to make you a criminal, did I? So I had to stay out. I had to wait. I didn't want you to go to jail." "Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Dean closed his eyes, a vein throbbing in his temple. The depth of manipulation needed to convince a 6-year-old that his survival would throw his father behind bars was nothing short of monstrous. As Jace wept uncontrollably, his grasp on the crumpled piece of paper finally slackened. His fingers, raw and swollen, slowly unfurled. The paper star slipped from his hand, landing softly on the carpet, a pitiful, soggy remnant. Dean now noticed it was cut from the classified section of a local free newspaper, highlighted in a faded yellow, probably the only marker Jace had access to at home. Dean reached out, but a small hand beat him to it. It was Lily, the little girl with pigtails who had spoken up earlier. Quietly, she had edged closer, while Dean was focused on Jace, ignoring Mrs. Vane's sharp whisper to sit down. Lily lifted the star, smoothing it gently on her palm. treating it with solemn care, the kind reserved for sacred relics. She fixed her gaze on Dean, her eyes magnified behind thick glasses. "He made this during recess yesterday," Lily said softly but clearly. "He didn't go out to play. Instead, he stayed inside and made it. He used the scissors from the craft bin." Dean watched her closely. "Made it for who?" "For her," Lily replied, raising a finger to silently accuse Mrs. Vane. Mrs. Vane flinched. "Lily, that's enough. Go back to your seat right now." Lily did not budge. She stared at Mrs. Vane with the fierce, unshakable clarity of a child who sees the villain behind the mask. He tried to give it to her before the party started. Lily continued, turning back to Dean. "He said he didn't have money to buy a gift, but he made a star for the tree. He wanted it to go on top." Dean's eyes shifted from the star in Lily's hand to the expensive pre-lit artificial tree in the corner, trimmed with delicate glass ornaments that likely cost more than his family's weekly groceries. "And then what happened?" Dean asked, his voice tight like a coiled spring. "She laughed," Lily said. "She took it just like a used tissue pinched with 2 fingers. Told the class trash doesn't belong on the tree. Trash goes outside." Then she ripped the star off the string. Lily lowered her gaze to the soggy, crumpled star. She said Jace was ruining the look, that he was filthy, and that he needed to stay outside until he could learn to be clean. Dean slowly rose to his full height, unfolding his limbs with heavy, deliberate resolve. His damp uniform clung to his muscles, but the officer's calm was gone. Now he looked like a force of reckoning, an avenging executioner. He took the soggy star from Lily's hand. "Thank you, Lily," he said. "Go stand by Jace. Keep an eye on him for me." Lily nodded silently and settled beside Jace, gently patting his shoulder. Dean turned toward Mrs. Vane and strode forward. Duke rose and stepped aside, letting his handler lead the confrontation. Mrs. Vane trembled now. Her arrogance was crumbling, exposing the fear beneath. "Officer Creston, you have to understand he's troubled. He has an overactive imagination," she stammered. "I never said those things about jail. He's misunderstood. He misunderstood." Dean just repeated calmly, stopping 2 feet away from her, holding up the ruined newspaper star. "Did he misunderstand when you called this trash? Did he misunderstand when you told a 6-year-old that saving his own life would cost his dad his freedom?" "I was using a metaphor." Mrs. Vane gasped, sweat beading on her brow. Despite the cold wind Dean let pour into the room. "I was trying to teach him consequences, civic duty. I just lost track of time. It's been a hectic day." "A mistake," Dean snapped. "A mistake's forgetting to grade a paper." His voice sank into a low, resonant tone that seemed to shake the very floor beneath them. Spilling coffee might be a simple mistake, but locking a child inside a frozen cage was something far darker. That was cruelty. "I didn't lock the door," she cried out, desperately clinging to that fragile excuse. "No," Dean replied firmly. "You did something far worse. You locked his mind away." He stepped closer, inches from her, invading her space, forcing her eyes to meet his. "You knew he looked up to me. You knew he dreamed of becoming a cop one day. And you twisted that love," Dean said, voice heavy with sorrow. "You took the purest part of him, his adoration for his father, and turned it into a weapon meant to break him." He dropped the soggy badge onto her desk, its dampness spreading across her once pristine lesson plan like a stain on her conscience. "You said you were teaching him discipline," Dean asked quietly. "Yes, he needs structure," she insisted. But Dean's eyes pierced through her. "No, you weren't teaching discipline. You were breaking the law. Child endangerment, illegal restraint, assault. Those are crimes, Mrs. Vane." She gasped. "You can't be serious. I am a tenured teacher." Dean's voice hardened, unyielding like unforgiving steel. "And I'm a father who just watched his son die, then come back to life." "Bye." "You didn't just harm a student, Mrs. Vane," he said, voice heavy with warning. "You attacked a police officer's family, and I swear, by the time I'm finished, you won't just lose your tenure, you'll lose your freedom." He reached for his belt. Mrs. Vane flinched in terror, fearing he was drawing his firearm, but Dean pulled out his radio instead. It was dead, only crackling with static. He stared at it, and then at her. "You're under detention," he declared. "If you try to leave this room, Duke will stop you. And unlike my son, Duke doesn't play by your rules." Turning back to Jace, Dean left Mrs. Vane sliding down the wall, gasping for air, trapped not only by a loyal wolf, but by the crushing weight of her own guilt. The paramedics arrived in a blur of haste and noise, a distant storm crashing over Dean's world. The once silent, tense classroom filled with a flurry of uniforms and urgent footsteps. Dean handed Jace over to the EMTs, his arms suddenly empty, aching with loss the minute his son was lifted from them. He watched as the small oxygen mask was secured to Jace's face, the plastic fogging with shallow, fragile breaths. Duke Dean growled, his voice hoarse from raw emotion. "Stay. Watch her." He pointed firmly at Mrs. Vane. The teacher now sat guarded by a rookie officer, her eyes darting fearfully to Duke. The German Shepherd remained unmoved, a steadfast sentinel guarding the room, watching the woman like a stone gargoyle, ensuring she didn't so much as twitch until cuffed. Dean climbed into the ambulance's back, the door slamming shut behind him, sealing off the chaos, as the vehicle lurched forward, fighting the treacherous ice-coated roads en route to Oakidge General Hospital. The drive twisted through time, stretched taut with tense moments. Dean held Jace's hand, the only part of him exposed beneath thick thermal blankets. Eyes locked on the heart monitor's frantic beeping, a wild, desperate rhythm of a body clinging to life. When they rushed Jace into the emergency room, the sudden shift from the chaos of the ambulance to the sterile, glaring lights of the hospital was jarring. A trauma team awaited, led by Dr. Eris Thorne, commanding the room with calm precision. Dr. Thorne was a woman in her late 40s, her graying hair pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense bun, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of every tragedy the city had thrown her way. She moved with a calm, precise efficiency that pierced through the chaos in the room. "Hypothermia protocol, doctor." Thorne commanded the nurses sharply. "Bring the bear hugger warming blanket. Start the warm IV fluids. We have to get these soaked clothes off him immediately." Dean stood rooted in the corner of the trauma bay, his back pressed to the cold, unforgiving wall. He felt like a stranger in his own son's life, powerless to do anything except watch. "Officer, I need you to step back," a nurse said softly. "That's my son." Dean's voice was hollow, broken. "I know," she replied quietly. "Let us work." Dr. Thorne picked up a heavy pair of medical shears. "The shirt is stuck to the skin because of the wet and cold. We're cutting it off." Snip! The scissors sliced through the fabric with a decisive, final sound. Dr. Thorne carefully cut up the middle of the fragile cotton shirt Jace had been wearing. With gentle hands, she pulled the fabric back, revealing the boy's chest and arms under the harsh, unyielding fluorescent lights above. The entire room fell silent. But this wasn't the quiet of focused medical care. It was the stunned, breathless silence of witnesses to something truly horrifying. Dr. Thorne froze. She gazed down at Jace's body, then slowly lifted her eyes to meet Dean's. Her face shifted from professional composure to a darker, deeper sorrow. Dean let go of the wall and took cautious steps toward the gurney, his legs feeling like they were moving through thick, heavy water. "What?" he asked, voice trembling. "Is it frostbite? Tell me it's frostbite." Then his eyes dropped. The skin on Jace's upper arms, shoulders, and sides wasn't just pale from the cold, it was a tortured canvas of violence. Bruises, countless bruises. They appeared in all stages of healing. Some were sickly yellow-green, fading reminders of pain from weeks ago. Others still fresh, angry shades of purple blooming like dark, painful flowers against his pale, fragile skin. Dean stared, his mind refusing to fully grasp the brutal evidence before him. He was a cop. He'd seen plenty of abuse cases. He knew what a fall looked like. He knew what playground injuries looked like. These were nothing like accidents. On Jace's left bicep, 2 perfectly spaced oval bruises stood out fingerprints. Someone had grabbed him hard enough to break tiny blood vessels deep beneath the skin. On his ribs, a darker, more vicious bruise, a shove, a violent push into the desk corner or a door frame, and on the soft skin of his inner arm, small, cruel pinch marks, tiny crescent shapes where fingernails had dug in, meant to inflict pain without leaving visible marks beneath his clothes. "Oh God," Dean breathed out weakly. The air left his lungs and he clutched the side rail of the bed to stop himself from falling. Dr. Thorne continued her examination with an almost reverent gentleness, rotating Jace's arm to reveal his shoulders back. "These are defensive wounds," she said softly, pointing to a bruise on his forearm. He raised his arm to shield his face or head. "And these," she traced the pinch marks, "these are calculated. They're meant to inflict pain to force compliance." Dean felt the room swirl around him. The puzzle pieces he'd been piecing together all day suddenly crashed into a nightmarish truth so ugly it made him want to heave. The hoodie, the oversized gray hoodie Jace had refused to take off that morning. "I thought he was just ashamed." Dean thought the painful realization striking him like a cruel blow to the gut. "I thought he felt ashamed of our poverty. I believed he was embarrassed because I couldn't afford the elf costume for him. But Jace wasn't hiding his lack of money. He was hiding his pain." This morning when Dean reached out to him, Jace recoiled, not out of defiance, but pure fear. He carried the scars of trauma like a map stretched across his body, wrapping himself tightly in cloth to shield his father from the raw outlines of his suffering. "He wouldn't let me change his clothes," Dean choked, tears spilling hot and fast down his face. "Today," Jace screamed when I tried to touch his arm. "I got angry, I got frustrated." Dr. Thorne looked at Dean with tender sympathy. But she spoke without sugarcoating the truth. "He was protecting you. Protecting me." Dean's confusion was plain. Dr. Thorne's voice was calm and clear. Abusers often use threats against those the victim loves to keep them silent. If that teacher threatened your job, your freedom, Jace would endure anything to stop that from coming true. Hiding those bruises was his way of guarding you. Dean covered his face with both hands. He slid down the sides of the stretcher until his knees hit the cold linoleum. There he knelt, broken, in the middle of the trauma bay, overwhelmed by grief. He was a protector. That's who he was. A badge on his chest, a gun at his side, facing down danger and storm. But the evil hadn't come from a dark alley stranger. It came from a woman in a Christmas sweater, in a warm classroom. The same woman he trusted to watch his son each morning. And he had failed. The weight of that failure crushed him utterly. Dad came a firmer voice. Dean's head snapped up. Jace was looking straight at him. The oxygen mask was gone, replaced by a nasal cannula leaving his face clear to see. His eyes were heavy with sedation, clouded but fixed on Dean. Dean hurried to his side, gently taking Jace's hand, cautiously avoiding the IV lines and bruises. "I'm right here, Jace. I'm right here." Dean wiped his eyes with his sleeve, struggling to regain control as his hands trembled. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I had no idea. I swear to God I didn't know." Jace looked down at his exposed arms, the bruises displayed openly now. For a moment the old fear flickered across his eyes. The fear that the secret was out, that the police might come for his dad. But then Jace looked up at Dean, saw the tears, the brokenness. Jace, a 6-year-old weathered by the world's cruelty, did something that shattered Dean and put him back together all at once. He reached out with his free hand, his fingers still flushed pink from the warming fluids, and gently touched Dean's wet cheek. With a clumsy but tender thumb, he brushed away a tear. "Don't cry, Daddy," Jace whispered. "I let you get hurt." Dean sobbed. "I'm supposed to be the hero. I'm supposed to protect you." Jace shook his head weakly against the pillow, a faint, weary smile brushing his lips. "You came," Jace said quietly. "You came through the snow. You opened the door." His eyelids fluttered closed for a moment, then sprung open with fierce resolve. "You're my hero," Jace whispered. "You saved me from the cold." Those words hung heavy in the sterile hospital air. "You saved me from the cold." Dean stared at his son, at the bruises Mrs. Vane had left there, and felt the ache deepen in his soul. He contemplated the mental prison she had forged around this boy's mind. He dwelled on the boundary Jace was too frightened to cross. Something within Dean grew resolute. The guilt didn't disappear. It never would. but it hardened, crystallizing into armor. He clasped Jace's hand and pressed a gentle kiss on the knuckles over a fading yellow bruise. "Yes," Dean said softly. His voice steady now. It was low, deep, and fierce. "I pulled you from the cold, and now I swear no cold will ever touch you again." Rising to his feet, he brushed away the last tear from his cheek. When he met Dr. Thorne's gaze, his eyes were dry and unwavering. "Dr. Dean said I need you to record everything. Every scratch, every bruise, every pinprick mark. I want photographs. I want exact measurements. I want a medical report so rock-solid no defense attorney on this earth can unravel it." Dr. Thorne nodded, an approving yet grim expression settling on her face. "I've already summoned the medical photographer. We're running a full skeletal survey to check for fractures. We'll build an unbreakable fortress of evidence, officer." Good Dean said, his eyes returning to Jace, who was drifting into a peaceful, warm sleep, wrapped in safety. Dean touched his badge. He wasn't just a father anymore, he was the law. And Mrs. Bain had made the fatal mistake of waging war against both. The hospital room was warm, a refuge framed by beige walls and the steady beep of monitors. Yet Dean felt trapped, suffocating. He stood by the bedside watching Jace sleep. The boy seemed impossibly fragile in the hospital bed, his bruised arms resting on crisp white sheets, his chest rising and falling in a calm, medicated rhythm. Dr. Thorne had reassured him Jace was stable, that the warming treatment was taking hold, and that a social worker was on the way to sit with him. But Dean could neither rest nor sit still. His mind churned with police procedures and fierce parental fury. He knew how the system worked. Mrs. Bain was detained for now, yes, but detention wasn't conviction. She was a tenured teacher with a spotless record and standing in the community. Without ironclad evidence, her lawyer would spin this as a tragic accident, a misunderstanding, a timeout gone wrong, a defiant child refusing to come inside. They'd say it was Jace's word against hers, and they'd mercilessly tear his 6-year-old son apart on the witness stand. Dean bent down, kissed Jace's forehead. "I'll be right back, buddy," he whispered. "I'm going to make sure she never hurts another soul." He stepped out of the room, his boots heavy and determined on the linoleum. Duke waited in the hallway, sitting alert by the door. The moment Dean approached, the dog rose, sensing the shift in his handler's spirit. The warm protection had vanished. The hunter was back. "Let's get to work," Duke Dean said. Their drive back to Oakidge Elementary was a relentless fight against the weather. The storm hadn't eased. If anything, the sudden freeze had hardened into a fierce, unyielding